Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my 2022 NFL season preview. Before we get started, I just want to quickly apologize for the lack of an upload last week. I had some stuff going on with the holiday, so that prevented me from getting a video recorded and out. So I apologize about that, but I am happy to be back, and hopefully, I will not have an extended delay like that again. But it was a very interesting time to have a delay because a big transaction occurred with at least one of these teams, which I will explain more, but sort of does change the trajectory a bit. But with that being said, and with all that out of the way, we are here today with the NFC South. We are quickly approaching the end of our division previews, and we'll get more into the prediction side of playoffs and things of that nature. But starting off, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And last year they went 13-4 and they lost in the divisional round to the eventual Super Bowl champions, the Rams. And to say that the Buccaneers offseason went how probably anybody predicted, I think would be laughable. Because the offseason started with them potentially losing out on their quarterback, Tom Brady. And I almost said star quarterback. That word doesn't even really apply to Tom Brady. He's the greatest quarterback of all time. So you have a team who thought they were going to be without the best quarterback of all time, and they were going to have to make changes. And a lot of those changes were going to be a lot of their players that they have had and are used to having were most likely going to leave. However, right before the offseason started, Tom Brady came out of retirement, and that sort of shaped the offseason moving forward for them. And to say that the Buccaneers had a good offseason is another understatement. Again, to start off by having the greatest quarterback of all time decide not to retire and come back for another season, that instantly brings your chances of making a Super Bowl from very minuscule to abundant. And they didn't stop there. They made a lot of great moves. They re signed Chris Godwin, who I don't have listed on the key additions because he is a player that was already on the roster, but he's a top 10 receiver when he's healthy. And while he will be recovering from an injury, they have more than enough serviceable weapons to fill that spot while he recovers. Now, one of the first big moves they made was acquiring Shaq Mason from the Patriots. They got him for a third or a fourth round pick, and he's one of the best guards in the league. And it's really odd why the Patriots decided to let go of Shaq Mason, but for the Bucks, I mean, you did have some concerns near the end of last season with the line and how they were able to protect Tom Brady. Shaq Mason is going to be a key piece this upcoming year. And again, this isn't just a minor upgrade. This is a major upgrade. He's one of the best in the league. And the fact you got him for very minimal, it says a lot. They also acquired a lot of veteran players who had been waived from previous teams. Logan Ryan is one of the best examples of that. And I don't really know what position they'll play him in, but he can pretty much fit in corner, safety, wherever they want to play him. He'll be a good player for them. And lastly, I think one of the more significant moves is they got Russell Gage from the Falcons. Now, one of the biggest issues for the Bucks is when the whole Antonio Brown situation occurred. They had to try to find someone to fill that void, and they never really were successful in finding that. And Russell Gage, he's a good, on the younger side, wide receiver who, again, he'll fill in for Chris Godwin, most likely as their wide receiver 2, and then he'll be a perfect wide receiver 3. Now, of course, the biggest probably loss for the Buccaneers, of course, Rob Gronkowski retired. Now, Cam Brate is not going to 100% fill the void that Gronk left, but he'll do a serviceable job along with the tight ends that the Buccaneers drafted. And with that being said, I think the Buccaneers are going to have a fantastic season this upcoming year. I think they will end up going 14-3 because, I mean, this isn't only going to be Tom Brady's revenge tour. This is a much better Buccaneers roster, and their schedule compared to the other top teams in the league is relatively serviceable. So with that being said, the Bucks are going to be back on top. I think I can probably say there's going to be no other team in the NFC South that will challenge them. And we'll see if Tom Brady can go ahead and add another ring to his collection. Up next, we have the New Orleans Saints. And the New Orleans Saints were one of the more disappointing teams last year. And when I say disappointing, I don't mean in terms of how they performed or their talent, in terms of how their season ended. They were very close to making the playoffs and sort of similar to the Chargers because I don't remember, I think it was the 49ers, because the 49ers made it, they were unable to make it. And this was a very good team last year. They were a defensive powerhouse. They were well coached. They were well built. They were well constructed. And they were sort of a team almost like the Titans a bit, where they really didn't have a single standout player. Again, well, I guess that's a big difference. Of course, Titans have Derrick Henry. But they were really just a mashup of a ton of decent guys all around. I think they were more notable on their defensive side of the football, and we'll see that when we get to my top 5 defensive players in the NFC South. But they were a serviceable team, and barring some injuries, I think they would have easily made the playoffs. And with that being said, the biggest question for them coming into this new season is what's going to happen with their head coach position. So Sean Payton, who has been one of the best coaches in the NFL, decided to retire, and Dennis Allen is the new head coach of the Saints. Now, Dennis Allen has a lot of the same coaching style and a lot of experience under Sean Payton, so I don't know if the change is going to be that drastic for the franchise, but you never know how a new coach is going to go. So it's sort of hard to gauge because we're not looking at exactly the same Saints team coach-wise, even though we're looking at, I guess, a similar talent pool. And when I say similar talent pool, though, we do have to talk about their key offseason additions because the Saints got a lot better in certain regards. First of all, Tyrann Mathieu is still one of the better safeties in the NFL. He's top 5 easily. The fact that they got him sort of later in free agency after the Chiefs refused to re-sign him, he's going to be a great, great addition to that secondary. Chris Olave at wide receiver, I think is a good pickup for them. I think that Chris Olave is going to be a good player. I really don't know how good he will end up being. He's one of those players where, again, if he can get a good quarterback and he can have a coach that really focuses on his development, I think that he has a chance of being a fantastic player. But, I mean, from where he came from, I think that Chris Olave will be a great wide receiver number 2. And we're talking about the wide receivers for the New Orleans Saints. The biggest thing to note is that Michael Thomas missed all of last year, and Michael Thomas will be returning this coming year. And that's going to be probably the biggest boost to the wide receiving core for them. So having a duo of Michael Thomas and Chris Olave is going to be fantastic. Now we get to the last player that I listed, which is Trevor Penning. He was a offensive tackle who I sort of always listed as being one of the better tackle prospects in the NFL draft. The issue is he will be replacing Terron Armstead, who went to the Miami Dolphins. And Terron Armstead was not just a left tackle. He was one of the better left tackles in the NFL. Now, Trevor Penning, I really don't know if he is going to be maybe even a third of what Terron Armstead was immediately. Now, I mean, maybe long-term he can be a serviceable left tackle. I seriously doubt Penning will ever be one of the best left tackles in the NFL. If I'm wrong, then, that'll be a win for the Saints. But considering that you were able to replace him in the draft with a serviceable player, I think that's good in and of itself. Again, he's not the same player, and I don't think any way they could slice it they were going to get a same player as Armstead, but Penning is probably the best player you could have gotten to somewhat fill that void. And with that being said, the Saints, I have them going 9-8 once again. I think that they're a great team. I think that a lot is going to ride on Dennis Allen and also what's going to happen with Jameis Winston if he can stay healthy. If they can manage to keep Jameis healthy and they can manage to get Chris Olave going and the defense continues to play as well as it has, I think the Saints are on the up and up. And depending on how the pieces fall around the rest of the NFC, they have a chance to make the playoffs once again this upcoming season. Up next is the Atlanta Falcons. And Falcons fans, I think you know as well as I do that this is the start of what is possibly going to be a very long rebuild. So the Falcons really didn't have as bad of a season as I think a lot of people perceived that they had. Um, they didn't have a great season by any means. I mean, 7-10 is not great, but it's also not as bad as some other teams. But with that being said, the biggest thing that the Atlanta Falcons did is they moved on from their quarterback, Matt Ryan. And anytime you move on from a franchise quarterback, it's going to cause some growing pains moving forward. And especially because the Falcons really didn't go out this offseason and say, we are going to find our quarterback for the future. They sort of found some players that I think will fill the void for the time being and some that could potentially morph into that, but I don't think they have the real intention of doing so. There's going to be some growing pains. And the interesting thing about the Falcons is they have some very good players. Kyle Pitts and AJ Terrell are two of the better players on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball, I think, in the NFL. And that's going to make the Falcons a very interesting team. The Falcons are, in my opinion, the young and exciting team that you should keep your eye on because they have a lot of young talent, and I think moving forward in 4 or 5 seasons, they're going to be great. And I think a lot of that has to do with what they did in this offseason regarding how they decided to go following the Matt Ryan trade. So starting off, we need to talk about the signal caller for at least this season, and that is Marcus Mariota. Now, Marcus Mariota was the second overall pick a few seasons ago with the Tennessee Titans. He then decided to go and be a backup for the Raiders. The Raiders used him in a lot of trick plays. Mariota still has great athleticism. His arm has always sort of been suspect, but it'll be very interesting to see how he does this year. He's going to be the quarterback one, at least for the start of the season. I think he'll be decent. I don't think he'll be great. He's going to be one of those players where he's going to have to get a groove going. And I think if he can do that, they'll be okay. But I think, honestly, what will end up happening is that he will put up a lot of empty stats, meaning he'll have good passing yards, he'll have good touchdown numbers, he'll probably have a lot more interceptions, but they're really going to be meaningless in the grand scheme of things. And we also have to mention that they drafted Desmond Ridder as well. I don't think Desmond Ridder is their quarterback of the future. I think that he's going to be an interesting piece to say if Mariota starts playing bad, they're going to throw him in and see how he does. I fully expect him to do that, and I think that there will probably be a few games this season where he may start more towards the end of the season. So it'll be an interesting dynamic. Again, I think Ridder is going to be a decent quarterback. I can't foresee him being the Falcons' quarterback of the future, especially with the upcoming draft having just so many great quarterback prospects, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, the biggest pick that the Falcons made in the draft was Drake London in the first round. Now, Drake London is, in my opinion, this was one of the better wide receiver picks. Drake London is sort of modeled after Mike Evans on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's tall. He's everything you want in a modern wide receiver, number one. And I think him and Kyle Pitts already give the Falcons two great players moving forward that they can build around. And I'm very excited to see what happens with Drake London. I think he is a sleeper for Offensive Rookie of the Year. And finally, they drafted Casey Hayward, or they didn't draft Casey Hayward, excuse me. They signed Casey Hayward, who is a serviceable veteran cornerback. And honestly, the duo of he and AJ Terrell is one of the more dynamic cornerback duos in the NFL. Now, with that all being said, this is going to be an exciting team to watch, but they're not going to be a good team. I have them going 3-14. The competition around the NFL has gotten way better, as I've said in the past. And the Falcons don't want to win. They want to build these young players. They want to model these young players. They want to have their young team make mistakes, and they want a high draft pick in the upcoming draft, which is full of great quarterbacks and other weapons for young teams like the Falcons. So the Falcons are starting their rebuild, but out of many of the other teams that are also rebuilding, the Falcons already have some foundational pieces in place, which make the future very exciting. All right, and last but certainly not least, we have the Carolina Panthers. Now, the Carolina Panthers, as I alluded to, made a move, a very big move prior to me recording this, which is they traded for Baker Mayfield. Now, as I mentioned when I discussed the Browns, I think that Baker Mayfield has gotten a lot more hate than is probably warranted. I think he's a good quarterback, and I don't think the record that I have for them currently probably accurately represents where they could finish following getting Baker Mayfield. It's too late for me to completely update all of the schedules and the scores and my score predictions that I've already made. However, when I post my playoff video, I think I will maybe do a little update and sort of reconfigure how I think the Panthers would do and adjust the final records accordingly. So I want to make that note before we get into it. Because Baker Mayfield, again, I think he's a great quarterback. I think he's much better than Sam Darnold. If they choose to start Sam Darnold, I think that that's foolish. And I think Baker Mayfield has a potential to be the Panthers' long-term option at quarterback. I think a lot of people want to overlook how good he was prior to his injuries with the Browns. And I think that, again, this is a fantastic pickup for the Panthers, and I'd be very shocked if he really continues to play as poorly as he did his final year with Cleveland. Now, again, despite the Panthers not being great, the probably the first thing we have to get off the bat is this is a big test for Matt Rule. If he doesn't do well this season, he's getting fired. He's one of the coaches that have been on the hot seat for a while, so he tried to do everything he could to improve his roster this offseason, and again, he did a great job at that. There were a lot of players that the Panthers picked up in the offseason. I think probably the one that I want to highlight the most is Matt Ioannidis. He is a great defensive tackle. I wouldn't put him in the top 10, but he's one of those that's a serviceable player. The fact that Panthers got him for relatively cheap is a big pickup for them. I will say, even though they got a lot of good players, I was sort of shocked by the Hassan Reddick departure. In my opinion, I would have done everything that I could to have re-signed him. However, I think most likely that was just a matter of them knowing that coming up, they're not only going to have to pay people like Brian Burns, but they also just paid DJ Moore. They're going to have to look for some cap room to sign some of their better players, because that's the thing about the Panthers is their record might not reflect it, but they have good players at various positions around their team. And they really have a good foundation, sort of like the Falcons, where if they can just get a few more pieces and they can get things going, they're going to be a great team. And I think you see that perfectly with their rookie, Ike Ekwonu. Now, I was extremely high on Ike Ekwonu. He is a great offensive line prospect, and I think that the Panthers really made a fantastic choice here. Not only is he a local boy because he went to NC State, but that was one of the main issues last season was their offensive line was repeatedly one of their biggest weaknesses as a team. And now, again, you get Baker Mayfield. You're either going to start Baker Mayfield, you're either going to start Sam Darnold, or you're going to start the other quarterback they drafted in the draft this year, who for some reason I am blanking on his name. I apologize. I will put that name somewhere on the screen. Matt Corral. Excuse me, Matt Corral. I think Baker's the best out of them. I think Matt Corral maybe has a decent backup potential. I really don't know. But this is going to be an exciting team to watch. I think while the Steelers, three quarterback room is getting a lot of attention, I think the Panthers should get more attention. And again, I think it will because the Baker Mayfield trade is very new. And again, I have them right now going 3-14. As I mentioned, again, I want to make a big disclaimer. Once I release my playoff video, I will do an adjustment based on how I think their season will go post Baker. But if I'm a Panthers fan, I do think my team made a lot of great moves this offseason. I think we're on the up and up. So fear not, Panthers fans. This might be another more difficult season for you, but brighter days are ahead. Now let's get into my top 5 offensive players in the NFC South. My number 5 offensive player in the NFC South is Christian McCaffrey, running back, Carolina Panthers. 99 rushing attempts, 442 yards, 1 touchdown, 4.5 average yards per run, and an 80.6 grade from PFF. Now, McCaffrey a few seasons ago was the best running back in the league. I mean, he had over 1,000 rushing yards and receiving yards. So why is he number 5? The reason he's number 5 is because he's never healthy. And it's something that I hate to see because, again, I think he is one of the better players in the NFL, and you hate seeing when the better players in the NFL are never on the field. But McCaffrey has not proven he can stay healthy. He can have all the potential and talent he wants, but if he can't get on the field, he's not going to get higher than this. I hope he gets higher because he deserves to be higher, but for now, I have to leave him at the number 5 spot. My number 4 offensive player is Cordero Patterson, running back, Atlanta Falcons. 153 rushing attempts, 618 yards, 6 touchdowns, 4 average yards per rush, and an 81.3 grade from PFF. Cordero Patterson really came out of nowhere last year and was one of the focal points for the Atlanta Falcons offense. And as I said, the Falcons are in a really strange position where they have a lot of good players on the offense and defense. They just have very few, but the ones that they have are extraordinary. And Cordero Patterson is a testament to this. And again, as I said, they're going to have 2 quarterbacks this year who are not great. And Cordero Patterson is going to be a key focal point once again of this offense, and I think his numbers are going to go through the roof, and that is why he lands my number 4 spot in my top 5 offensive players. My number 3 offensive player in the NFC South is Mike Evans, wide receiver, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 74 receptions, 1,035 yards, 14 touchdowns, 14 average yards per catch, and a 73.2 grade from PFF. Now, it's quite simple why Mike Evans is number 3 on my list, and that's because Rob Gronkowski retired and Chris Godwin is injured. So Tom Brady's going to have to feed the ball to Mike Evans. And Mike Evans has shown that he is probably Tom Brady's second favorite target on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's going to be his first favorite target this year. And again, as I said, Mike Evans is the perfect sort of build and has a perfect frame for a modern NFL wide receiver. And if the Buccaneers make it back to the Super Bowl this year, which I think they have a great chance to, it's going to be behind a great year from Mike Evans, and that is why he comes up at my number 3 spot. My number 2 offensive player in the NFC South is Kyle Pitts, tight end, Atlanta Falcons. 68 receptions, 1,026 yards, 1 touchdown, 15.1 average yards per catch, and an 80.3 grade from PFF. Now you hear those stats. It's important to note that Kyle Pitts was a rookie when he did all that. And he's only going to get better from here. As I said, again, he has a potential to beat Travis Kelce out to be the best tight end in the league. Maybe not this year, but in a few years. Kyle Pitts will probably be a top 5 tight end by the end of the season. He has so much potential. And while his quarterbacks might hold him back, he is just such an offensive weapon that he's going to light up the league and he's going to light up every team he plays. Now, I think predictably there's one player who's above him, but Kyle Pitts is worthy of landing at the number 2 spot on my list. And my number 1 offensive player in the NFC South is Tom Brady, quarterback, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 5,316 yards, 43 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, a 68.1 QBR, and a 92 grade from PFF. He's the GOAT. He's the best quarterback in the league. I don't care what anybody else says. Until Tom Brady proves me wrong, he is the best player in the NFC South and arguably the best player in the entire NFL. Now, again, Tom Brady's on the older side, but I don't think he would have come back if he really didn't think he has a chance to win another Super Bowl. And as I mentioned before, the only way the Buccaneers not only make the playoffs, but even have a shot of sniffing the Super Bowl is with Tom Brady. They've upgraded their pieces around him. Tom Brady's going to be out for revenge since he didn't make it to the Super Bowl and win a ring last year. So for the rest of the NFL, look out, because the number one player in the NFC South is out for revenge, and he's coming. And that is why, simply put, Tom Brady is the best offensive player in the NFC South. Now, let's move on to the defensive players. My number 5 defensive player in the NFC South is Vita Vea, defensive tackle, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 22 tackles, 4 sacks, and a 73.2 grade from PFF. Vita Vea is a big player, and anytime you have someone of Vita Vea's size and power on the defensive line, he's going to wreck opposing offensive lines. And that's exactly what Vita Vea has done. And he's going to continue to do that. Again, as I said, Tom Brady is the key to the Bucs getting back, but without their big, strong defensive line, and with Vita Vea leading that charge, they're not making it back. And I think that Vita Vea, while he has, I guess, had a few health issues here and there, he's been a fairly consistent player, and he is worthy of landing on the top 5, and that is why he's number 5 on my list of the top 5 defensive players in the NFC South. My 4th best defensive player in the NFC South is Marshawn Lattimore, cornerback, New Orleans Saints. 55 solo tackles, 3 interceptions, 19 passes defended, and a 77.3 grade from PFF. As I said, the Saints have some great players on the defensive side of the ball, and Marshawn Lattimore is probably, arguably, their most recognizable. He's a great cornerback, and again, when you go up against players like Tom Brady, you're going to need great cornerbacks. Not only Tom Brady, when you're going to have to go up against people like Matthew Stafford and Aaron Rodgers and Dak Prescott, you're going to need someone to defend the football. As I mentioned when we started talking about the AFC and all of their gunslingers there, you need a great cornerback. And Marshawn Lattimore is arguably one of the better cornerbacks in the entire NFC. And that is easily why he makes the number 4 spot on my list. My number 3 best defensive player in the NFC South is Cameron Jordan, defensive end, New Orleans Saints. 38 tackles, 12 and a half sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and an 84.3 grade from PFF. Now, Cam Jordan has been one of the most well-known defensive ends in the entire league, and it's for good reason. He is a fantastic player, and he's been a vocal point for the New Orleans Saints for the previous few years. And nothing's going to change this upcoming season. He is the leader of their defensive line, and he is exactly what the Saints need to remain competitive. And I fully expect him to have a great season. I think he's starting to get overshadowed by more of the other defensive ends in the league because we're now a defensive end heavy league. But he really shouldn't be because he's a fantastic player, and that's why he finishes at the number 3 spot on my list. My number 2 best defensive player in the NFC South is Antoine Winfield Jr., safety, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 62 solo tackles, 2 forced fumbles, 2 interceptions, 6 passes defended, and an 86.1 grade from PFF. Now, Winfield Jr. is someone who I really don't see many people talk about, but he is quietly become one of the better safeties in the entire NFL. He has been probably the most consistent member of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers secondary, and if they are to make it back to the Super Bowl, once again, they need him to have a big year, and I think he will. He was only 23 years old last year when he had those great stats, and I think with a more motivated team and a better overall surrounding unit, he is going to light up the league this year, and he is easily going to hit the number 2 spot on my list. But there's one player better than him, and we're going to talk about him right now. And my number 1 defensive player in the NFC South is A.J. Terrell, cornerback, Atlanta Falcons. 52 solo tackles, 1 forced fumble, 3 interceptions, 16 passes defended, and an 82.6 grade from PFF. A.J. Terrell is young. He is the new breed of cornerback in the league. In fact, there were conversations last year about him being the best cornerback in the league. I don't know if you could say he's the best yet, but he's definitely up there. He's in the conversation. And again, while the Falcons aren't going to be a fantastic team this year, they're not even going to be a good team this year. A.J. Terrell is the type of player that, again, they have already on their team that once they get good, he's going to be a captain and a leader that is going to lead them back to victory. And that's why he ranks as the #1 defensive player in the NFC South. Thank you all for watching. Again, I'm sorry for the delay with this video, but we should be back to a relatively normal schedule. And with that being said, I will see you all next week when we discuss the final division, arguably the most competitive division in the entire NFC, the NFC West. I will see you all then.